At number 10, the Silla. Even though the Silla kingdom was one of the longest standing royal dynasties ever, not many people know about it because very few traces of their existence have been left behind. The Silla ruled most of the Korean peninsula between 57 BCE and 935 CE, but again, not much is known about them. Very few burial sites have been found, and the majority of what's been recovered by researchers are various treasures such as ornate jewelry and weapons. One set of remains that was discovered by archaeologists did, however, give scientists a bit of a glimpse into the life of the Silla. The remains of a woman estimated to be in her early 30s was found, and from what scientists discovered, they know that she was likely a vegetarian and that she had an elongated skull, which may suggest that the Silla could have practiced body modifications in their society, but nothing can be confirmed. The story of how the Silla came to be comes from legend. It was said that the Silla was founded by a man that was hatched from a mysterious egg in the forest and married a queen who was born from the ribs of a dragon. Knowing this legend, it's not surprising to find out that this society was very aristocratic. If your founder was hatched from an egg and married a queen, then there's gotta be some kind of hierarchy going on. At number 9, the Indus. The Indus is the largest known ancient urban culture, and they did some pretty impressive things too. Stretching from the Indus River in modern-day Pakistan to the Arabian Sea and the Ganges in India, this ancient metropolis thrived from 3300 BCE to 1600 BCE. The Indus were quite innovative for their time, having created sewage and drainage systems for their large city. They also built huge walls and granaries, and they invested their time in arts by creating pottery and glazed beads, and they even had dental care. Scientists actually found the remains of a number of people who showed signs of having received dental work on their molars between 7,500 and 9,000 years ago. Things seem to have been going pretty well for these people, but eventually they had to leave their dwellings behind, and it is theorized that this happened because climate change started to affect the monsoonal rains in the area, and this in turn dried up most of their land, and obviously that isn't good for agriculture, and so they fled and went elsewhere. Before we continue learning about more ancient people, I would like to first take a moment to ask you guys to leave a like on this video if you're enjoying it so far, and maybe even subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We would love to have you as part of the Bumblebee family, so smash that subscribe button and join the hive. At number 8, the Sangsing-Dui. This Bronze Age culture is believed to have lived in what is now China's Sichuan province. First evidence of this group of people was first discovered in the late 1920s, but despite efforts of archaeologists and researchers, not much is known about this ancient tribe. What we do know about them is that the Sangsing-Dui were a very artistic group. Based on some of the artwork found by researchers, this group of ancient people were prolific makers of bronze and gold foil masks. Some scientists believe that these masks may have represented certain gods in their culture or even ancestors. No one really knows what happened to this group of people though. There is evidence that the Sangsing-Dui abandoned their homes 2,800 to 3,000 years ago and may have moved to a neighboring province, but more research is needed to prove this. As for why they may have relocated, some researchers believe that perhaps there was an earthquake or even a landslide that caused people to flee. At number 7, the Nok. The Nok tribe from what is now northern Nigeria lasted from 1000 BCE to 300 BCE and was a very mysterious culture that was actually discovered by complete accident. Tin miners happened to find ancient artifacts, including a terracotta head, during a mining operation in 1943. This discovery began a larger excavation expedition in the area, and they have since found plenty of other terracotta artifacts and sculptures, including depictions of people wearing jewelry and carrying weapons like batons and flails. Some of their sculptures also depicted people with diseases like elephantitis. Nok artifacts have a history of being stolen or removed from archaeological sites without notice, which has some researchers wondering what, other than their historical significance, makes them so prone to thefts. There is for sure a mystery there. At number 6, the Etruscans. In northern Italy between 700 BCE and 500 BCE, there lived an ancient society of people called the Etruscans. This group of people were a thriving theocratic society, that is, before they were eventually absorbed into the Roman Republic. The Etruscans had their own written language and left behind a number of luxurious family tombs as well. As I mentioned, this society was theocratic, as the artifacts they left behind suggest that religion and rituals were a big part of their daily lives. Among some of the artifacts that have been discovered by researchers include the earliest depictions of childbirth in Western art, and even a number of sandstone slabs that had been engraved with ancient Etruscan text. The archaeological sites where researchers continue to uncover the secrets of this ancient populace have revealed over 25,000 artifacts, and scientists continue to uncover more each day. At At number 5, self-mummification. The process of self-mummification is probably one of the most intense practices of body modification out there, not only because the process is so lengthy, but it also involves passing away at the end of it all. Self-mummification is done by people who practice Shingon Buddhism and is believed to be a way of ascending to a higher spiritual power and gaining immortality. The process of self-mummification is done over the course of 3,000 days. It involves a very strict dietary change, eliminating all cereals and instead being restricted to eating only nuts, tree bark, resin, pine needles, and berries. This diet reduces fat and moisture in the body to avoid bacteria breaking down the body after death. Some people who practice self-mummification also drink a tea that is made out of urushi, which makes the person throw up, but also acts as a kind of embalming fluid. Once a person's body is fully prepared, they are buried alive in a small chamber with an air hole, and they would chant and ring a bell to let people know that they're still alive. Once the bell stops ringing, the chamber is fully sealed, and 3 years later they're dug up and examined to see if they've been successfully mummified. If they have been, then their body is put on display and worshipped, and if the process was unsuccessful, then they're given an exorcism and reburied. At number 4, tattoos. As we all know, tattoos are still a very prominent part of our culture to this day, but this body modification also has a long history dating as far back as 3300 BCE. The earliest evidence of tattoos comes from Otzi the Iceman, a natural mummy who was found in the Alps who lived thousands of years ago and had a series of small dots and crosses tattooed along his lower spine, knee joints, and ankle joints. Researchers believe that this individual got these tattoos for medicinal reasons to relieve joint pain. In later years, tattoos were seen on more people, showing more intricate designs with different meanings. In ancient Peru, the process of tattooing was done by using cactus spines, dipping them into charcoal and pressing it into the skin. Even some Egyptian mummies showed evidence of tattoos on their bodies. So next time you ask your mom if you can have a tattoo and she says no, tell her about the history of this practice and maybe she'll reconsider. Maybe. At number 3, piercings. Much like tattoos, piercings are still very common in society. I mean, I have a few of them myself. They're in my face. Yeah, but again, much like tattoos, piercings also have a rich history to them. Otzi the Iceman, who I just mentioned, was not only found with tattoos, but he also had piercings as well. He's starting to sound a little too much like my Tinder matches, honestly. Otzi had pierced ears, which tells us that this body modification is just as old as tattoos. In the past, piercings were also seen amongst Olmec men in Mesoamerica, and they had plugs put into their cheeks, expanding them as they got bigger. Aztec men also had piercings sporting lip, nose, and earplugs, but in this society, your social status dictated what your piercings could be made from. The nobility wore piercings made from gold and precious stones, while lower classes of people had to wear bone. Victories in warfare also influenced someone's piercings, as they would be awarded bigger and bigger lip rings with every success. Even ancient Egyptians wore piercings. King Tut was found to have piercings, however belly button piercings were very exclusive and were reserved for the pharaoh, and anyone else who had one would be executed. At number 2, head shaping. The process of head shaping caused people in modern times to think that aliens were real. When remains were discovered with oddly shaped skulls, people really thought that we had proven the existence of extraterrestrials, but in reality it actually led to the discovery of an entire practice of human body modification. The process of head shaping involves putting some kind of pressure on a baby's head so that it grows into a different shape. This has been done using cloth or even boards in order to create the desired shape. The earliest evidence of modified skulls comes from Australia and dates back between 14,000 and 9,000 years ago. The skulls that were found had flattened foreheads and very prominent brow ridges. This practice also occurred in South America, where skulls with a variety of different shapes were also found. There were a number of different reasons for head shaping among different cultures. Some did it for aesthetics, others did it to protect spirits, but either way, it made for some very interesting looking people. And finally, at number 1, knife hand. Now this one is by far the craziest one in my opinion. So you know Captain Hook, right? He's got a hook for a hand. Well, this guy I'm gonna tell you about has Captain Hook beat by a landslide. A 6th century medieval burial was found in Italy, and it revealed a male warrior who had a knife for a hand. Yes, this man had a knife instead of a hand. This warrior had a hand amputation, however the reason for said amputation is unknown. In place of the lost hand, the prosthesis was a blade. Now I don't know if this guy lost his hand in battle or something, and the best that they could do was give him a knife as a placeholder, or if he willingly chopped off his hand so that he could have that knife hand, but either way, that is so bad, and I would have loved to see this guy in battle. Now before I wrap things up for today, I want you guys to tell me down below which body modification from this list was the most shocking to you. I think the knife hand thing was by far the most bizarre, but how about you guys? Let me know down in the comments. At number 10, first Americans. 2021 brought us a lot of new discoveries. The study of ancient humans gained more information with the discoveries made last year. One of the bizarre finds from last year include footprints that are believed to have belonged to some of the first people to set foot in America. These footprints were discovered in muddy earth at the edge of a wetland in New Mexico and were very well preserved. After some research was done, it was found that these footprints were made somewhere between 21,000 and 23,000 years ago, which greatly pushes back the timeline of when humans came to the Americas, the last continent to be settled by humans. Up until this point, it was believed that the first humans arrived in the Americas around 13,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age. These footprints, which are believed to have been made by children, have scientists thinking that these humans migrated to the area during a time where sheets of ice blocked the passage to North America, indicating that they were there much earlier than previously thought. At number 9, Dragon Man. Now, even though the name might not suggest it, no, this is not a half-man, half-dragon, but it's still a strange discovery. This past summer, scientists discovered the skull of this new human species that they've named Homo longi, longi being the Chinese name for dragon, and dragon being a reference to the location that these remains were found, since they were discovered by the Dragon River region in northeast China. The skull of the Dragon Man dates back 146,000 years, and scientists believe that this new species belongs to another sister group of the Homo sapiens, so they're even more closely related to us than Neanderthals. What stunned researchers the most about this incredible find was the size of this being's skull, because it was pretty big for a hominid from this time. This find opened a new avenue of discoveries for scientists, so that's exciting news for anyone who takes an interest in this sort of thing. I mean, with further research, who knows what we could learn from this find. Before we carry on talking about some more of these strange discoveries, why not take a moment to leave a like on this video if you're enjoying it so far, and while you're at it, consider subscribing to the channel to see more videos like this one. At number 8, Ancient Fashion. In 2021, archaeologists made a discovery that gives us an idea of how ancient humans made clothing. It was always assumed that ancient humans used animal furs for clothing, but up until recently, not much was known about their fashion. With this newest find, scientists were able to figure out how clothing was made all those thousands of years ago. 62 bone tools were found in Morocco, and it's believed that they were used to process and smooth animal skins. This find may be the earliest evidence for clothing in the archaeological records. The bone tools that were found are believed to be between 90,000 and 120,000 years old and were used to work leather. What's fascinating about this find is the fact that similar bone tools are still used by leather workers even to this day, so it's cool to know that our ways haven't changed much over the years. At number 7, Göbekli Tepe. The Neolithic era was the final period of the Stone Age where early humans began the process of domestication of animals and agriculture. For a long time, scientists believed that this era gave way to the process of holding rituals and creating monuments to their beliefs. But with the remarkable discovery of Göbekli Tepe, that entire idea was rewritten, as this mysterious site suggested that early hunter-gatherers made this temple as a ritualistic center far before these individuals decided to create settlements and begin the agricultural revolution. Based on evidence found at this site that dates 6,000 years older than Stonehenge, groups of hunter-gatherers came to this site in Urfa, Turkey some 11,500 years ago, and carved out this ritualistic site out of the limestone that covered the area. It is believed that Göbekli Tepe was just a stopping point for these early humans. It was a place to meet, hold feasts, and then leave again. Soon enough though, the desire to regularly hold these gatherings prompted the early humans to domesticate plants and animals to have a more dependable food source, so with this in mind, it is believed that these rituals are what gave way to the agricultural revolution, not the other way around. If you've seen any content regarding Göbekli Tepe, then you would know how eerie and mysterious this site looks, and because it's so old, it holds so many secrets that we have yet to uncover. At number 6, cave paintings. I think that out of all the things left behind by our ancient ancestors, cave paintings are one of the most bizarre. So many archaic art pieces have been found by scientists over the years, from statues to ceremonial pieces, but cave paintings are by far the most fascinating, at least in my opinion. Much like modern art, it is all up to interpretation, especially since the artists who created these cave masterpieces are long gone. Some of the most mysterious cave paintings are those that depict some kind of alien life forms. Yep, I said aliens. Even back in the days of the early humans, Homo sapiens have been looking to the stars, or even having their own encounters with extraterrestrials. One such depiction of alien life comes from the Wandjina cave paintings. These eerie looking paintings depict these sky beings, as they were called. These beings are depicted with white faces devoid of a mouth, large black eyes, and a head surrounded by a halo or some kind of helmet. According to legend, the Wandjina were sky people or spirits from the sky who descended from the Milky Way and created Earth and all of its inhabitants. The Wandjina realized how big a task their creation was, and so they sent for more of their people and spent their time creating, teaching, and being gods to the people of Earth. Eventually they left, either descending into the water or returning back into the stars. This extraterrestrial discovery has to be one of the most bizarre finds from our ancient ancestors.
Number 5. Nazca Lines. Imagine the confusion the first pilots, airmen, or anyone who got a good vantage point in the Peruvian desert, and to their surprise discover some illustrations in the ground. Except, you know, they're massive and no one knows who the heck drew them. Or at least its origins. Obviously it was done by some sort of ancient tribe or civilization, sure, but the grade school process of thought isn't answered. And if you remember, then you remember. You know what I'm talking about. Your 5 W's. Your who, what, where, when, why, and sometimes how. I almost forgot how to count there. That dyslexia is a heck of a thing. I mean, I know how they dug these bad boys in the sand, but hear me out. In those times, there's no planes. The only way you'd be able to see them is on the surrounding foothills. But there's no evidence that these people live close to those drawings, so who were they made for? Gods? Extraterrestrials? The weird guy with the weird hair on the History Channel will tell you so. All I'm gonna say is, anything that's meant for gods and aliens, it ain't meant for us. So keep an eye out in space there. Keep an eye out.
Number 4. Ballista balls. I'm not sure if you picked this up yet, but don't take things that don't belong to you. Great, hit the thumbs up for that common knowledge we should all have. Whether you believe in curses or not, leave things alone, and people for that matter, okay? If you want to learn more about Roman artillery, that's why we're here. Don't steal 6th century weaponry. Ever. It's a bad idea. Back in 1989, an archaeological team was brushing up the past near Israeli-Syrian borders, and the remains of an ancient Roman ballista, a massive crossbow, were found. It's exciting, but here comes the bad stuff. 6 years later, researchers found ballista balls, which were sadly the ammo when it came to these massive war machines. And in 2015, these balls appeared in a courtyard outside of a museum in Israel, written from an anonymous thief, imploring others to never touch those stone balls or take them. As, you know, they're cursed. They're all cursed, apparently, full of bad luck. His family apparently left him, this thief, and he had to sell everything he possessed in order to just get by, including those ballista balls. He was gonna sell them and he's like, you know what, no, that's the last thing I own, I'm putting it back. Could be a curse, again, or the fact that he was the thief. Either or. Both not great.
Number 3, Montezuma's Revenge. Yes, that's right, Montezuma's Revenge, a traveler's worst nightmare. I too have succumbed to the horrors of Montezuma's Revenge. And it's always when I gotta do something important, like on a movie set, or with a group of people I'm really trying to impress, especially career-wise. So the rule is no pickled bocconcini peppers before a critical event. However, I'm talking about a different kind of Montezuma's Revenge, not the bathroom kind. I'm talking about his gold. I'm talking about when Hernan Cortez and the conquistadors destroyed the Aztec Empire. Montezuma cursed them. And that applies to his lost gold as well, which in case you didn't know, the Spanish were after. It's pretty much all they were after. So if Montezuma can curse your family trip to Cancun, then surely he can curse a pile of his own gold and jewels. After some were dumped in the lake and others in the desert. I just wouldn't exactly be so excited to go find it. You don't know what might happen if you do. If he can give you diarrhea, maybe he can give you vomiting. You don't know. You don't know. I'm pointing a lot in this video.
And number 2, ancient mirror. It doesn't matter who you are, you've heard of this curse before. Maybe you haven't. Maybe you're experiencing this curse right now, I hope not. You break a mirror and what do you get? You get 7 years of bad luck. Has this happened to you ever? If so, what year are you on? I'm on 4 myself. How close are you to the 7-year mark? Because we got your back, okay? Ancient Romans believed that the human soul would renew every 7 years. That's where the 7-year thing comes into play. It's where it all started. It takes time to repair the human soul, right? Combined with the belief that mirror's reflection was the only way into the soul, well, now we have one dude in history who feels really bad for breaking the first ever mirror. Therefore, a curse has lived on. If you break a mirror, you're tearing the soul from the body, and now you're abandoning it. In Kazakhstan, if you break a mirror, evil spirits will haunt the person responsible for the damage. That's a pretty horrible deal. They say you can't look into a broken mirror afterwards, like once it shatters into a bunch of pieces, because that's bad luck as well. So if you break a mirror, you just gotta do nothing about it, I guess. You just gotta be like, okay, and sweep without looking. There's too many mirrors now. I can cut to today. I'm sure ancient Romans had no idea what 2022 would look like. We have phone cases with mirrors on them. We're literally surrounded by mirrors. I broke a studio mirror, a dance studio mirror once. Am I doomed? I feel like I'm doomed.
Number 1, vampire burial. If you couldn't tell, I get a lot of my knowledge from movies, TV, and video games. It's just what raised me, that's how it goes. So you can't blame me when my knowledge of vampires comes from Skyrim and the hit young adult romance novels Twilight. You know what I'm saying? However, what I do know is that they have sharp teeth, they don't like garlic, and will cease to exist if you drive a wooden stake through their heart. However, that's kind of a moot point, as most things would not work anymore if you did that. I know I wouldn't. Some folks in Poland a few hundred years ago were not taking any chances, however. Remains found in Kaldus, Poland were that of anti-vampire graves. Basically, you bury the vampires and you leave a wooden stake in their heart just in case it wants to wake up and eat you, or do whatever they do at night. I don't know, blah, 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 some of that stuff. Or remove their head entirely. No wooden stake? No problem. Just toss a couple small boulders into the hole. That way, the bloodthirsty menace can't get people. You know, boy, people in the past were so kind. That's so nice.
Number 10. Sacred books. The Romans paved the way for many following civilizations, okay? They invented surgical tools, they invented medicine on the battlefield, and before this era, literature took the form of a tablet or a scroll. The Romans, they created the codex. Pages stacked on top of one another, just bound pages. The reason you have homework right now to be doing instead of watching this. It's all thanks to the ancient Romans. The early codex was bound wax, and then it moved to animal skin. This was a big step because early Christians used this new invention to produce copies of the Bible. Important pieces of history, so rightfully so, they had to be locked away from the public. Now, back when King Tarquin ruled Rome, a local woman offered the Etruscan king 9 books. Now, these books were ignored at first, but upon its second glance, the beat-up manuscripts foretold the rise and fall of Rome. So, for most of its time, these spoiler-filled manuscripts were held in the Temple of Jupiter. So if anybody wants to do National Treasure 3, I have some ideas, just saying. We could do like 9 installments. And number 9, corrupt fire department. Oh, here we go. When we think back to ancient times, it's not long before we come across an ancient blaze or some ancient wild tragedy where you're like, oh my god, how did that even happen? Something that reminds you that it wasn't always a party, okay? It was rarely a party, in fact. When we think of Julius Caesar when regarding the leadership of Rome, we often forget Marcus Crassus. He was powerful and full of bright ideas on the sidelines. Marcus ran the fire brigade. A lot of open fires, a lot of accidents happening at this time, so of course we need responders. But back then, these officials arrived on site to this blazing emergency, but before helping out, Crassus would demand the owner sells their property to him first. Yeah, watch it burn or sell it for a not so handsome price. The choice is yours, and also you have 38 seconds to decide. TikTok. Number 8, ancient drag. I'll respect a girl's night out, okay? Always. I get it. My guy friends have ruined most nights out that I've had in the city, because guys are dumbasses. That's a fact. Ancient Romans were ahead of the game with this one as well. That's why they made the festival of the good goddess women only. Yeah, statues of men weren't even allowed to partake. Statues depicting men at this festival had to be draped. Yeah, none of us were seeing anything. But then in comes Mr. Jealous, Mr. Ancient FOMO himself. Enter Publius Clodius Pulcher, okay? This man disguised himself as a flute lady, but when he didn't play the flute, and also wasn't a lady, and also nobody knew him, it was a little obvious that an intruder was present. A trial soon followed and the festival was then suspended. See, guys ruin the party, even in ancient Roman days. This dude's like, nah, I'm gonna go ruin it. Number 7, sewer goddess. I love reading about ancient gods. It's my favorite topic. The Roman god of manure and fertilizer, for example. Where was that one in Hades? That would have been helpful. I would have beat that game in 8 minutes flat with him. The god of toilets. There's one we can't forget about either. Crepitus, okay? Every day we have to thank the god of toilets, right? If you haven't today, go ahead and thank them. The Romans regarded Glossina as the goddess of the main drain. The literal main drain to the city of Rome, all this water. This goddess was Glauca Maximum, aka Big Drain. Eventually, this god was affiliated with Venus, the goddess of beauty and love. Yeah, love me some big ass drains. Nice. That's a lie, actually. As a kid, I was so afraid of the bathtub drain. I would pull it and then just immediately high jump out of the tub. I don't want to get sucked down like Ant-Man. Know what I mean? Number 6, death before combat. With most of these Roman gladiators, they're trained, they understand a specific style of combat, and they're paired with an opponent that's somewhat equal. And then hundreds of people go, yeah, and they bet on you, and then see blood and stuff. It's horrible. But not all these gladiators are UFC fighters, okay? Not all of them are Kurt Russell. and handsome. No, a great amount of these gladiators were criminals who were forced to fight each other in the name of entertainment, or they were slaves. Yeah, these prisoners of war were not really on board with fighting a lion with a dagger, believe it or not. They understood this was a one-way trip most likely, so many of them took their own lives before the combat even begun. This one story is quite haunting, but it makes total sense, sadly. 29 prisoners, they were all set to fight these crazy animal battles in front of thousands, but they all strangled each other. They all took each other's lives with their bare hands because that was easier to them than walking into this nightmare publicly. That's horrible. The reason this was the easier choice to make, sadly, was because saying no to the combat or to the games would just lead to an even more painful public execution. So it's a lose-lose, sadly. They sucked. Number 5. The Hope Diamond. Coming from the 1660s, this curse began when a gem dealer named Jean-Baptiste Tavernier bought this large diamond when visiting India. He bought it with his earned money, with his money, okay? Remember that. The origins of the diamond were unknown, but it didn't matter. This beauty was just sitting there and he had to throw all the cash at it. He had to buy it with all of his money. For sure, the money that he had. Well, later on, after Tavernier got the diamond, rumors spread throughout Europe and the United States that he actually stole the diamond from the statue of a Hindu goddess. He didn't actually buy it. Yeah, a little different than his story. Sadly, more believable too. The newspapers actually kicked this one off by publishing the Hope Diamond as an ancient curse. The diamond at one point ended up in the hands of King Louis XVI and his wife, Marie Antoinette. Well, if you don't know about them, they lost their, they died. They lost their lives during the French Revolution, let's just say that. The old guillotine dream team. The stone then went to Lord Francis Hope come 1839. By that point it was deemed cursed for real, hence the Hope Diamond name. They ended up selling the diamond shortly after being reduced to poverty, and then Evelyn Walsh McLean bought the stone in 1912. Shortly after, her son was killed in a car accident, and when the stone was delivered to its final and current home, the Smithsonian, back in 1958, the driver delivering the package was later hit by a truck. He survived, but shortly after this, his house caught fire. Moral of the story, you don't need diamonds, for more reasons than one.
Number 4, crude oil. Before anyone jumps all over me and says, but Chetty, I love crude oil because it provides jobs and economy. That's true, you're right, and there's probably going to be someone else saying that without crude oil and gasoline, how can they keep up their lifestyle? I need gas for my sedan, pickup truck, SUV, RV, dirt bike, quad bike, go-kart, speedboat, my John Deere, lawn equipment. All this is true, and as a big dude, I appreciate the automobile just as much as the next guy. I ain't walking. However, one cannot deny the amount of trouble oil has caused folks in the last 100 years. Name a place with oil and there's probably someone foaming at the mouth trying to get their hands on it. You can go either way on this one, really. All I know is that I'm not the emperor of an evil empire looking for oil. Or am I?
Number 3. The Busby Stoop Chair. The Busby Stoop Chair comes from 1702, so right off the bat, this legend kicked off only 10 years after the Salem witch trials. So take this one with a grain of salt, please. People made odd choices at this time. They kind of believed anything, women were witches, chairs were haunted. Welcome to 1702, I guess. Englishman Thomas Busby had some issues with his father-in-law. He didn't handle those issues well, and he had to be hanged for it. Yeah, you can't just kill people for no reason, Thomas. What is it, 1701? That's crazy. He was hanged near the Humble Inn, ironic name, but a chair that was nearby during said hanging is now said to hold the spirit of one Thomas Busby. So legend has it, if you sit on this chair or if you put your knee on it or whatever, you are set to die in a frightful accident. A frightful accident! Big Chet, could you imagine? You sat in that chair, now you're gonna your pants at work.
No!
That's it. God forbid you needed to tie your shoelace at the Humble Inn. The horrors! The horrors. So the chair was declared haunted. The chair was declared haunted. But did anything actually happen afterwards? Yeah, honestly. Sounds silly, but this was the real deal, I guess. Locals say during World War II, airmen from a nearby base came to the pub, and those who sat in the Busby chair have never returned. Again, could have had something to do with the war, but let's continue. Then in the late 70s, more accidents were connected, but they still kept the chair around until 1798. They're like, it's haunted, but it looks nice, It matches the wall. It stayed at the inn for that long, and then it was donated to the Thirsk Museum. So if you feel like checking out some haunted chairs, there you go, freaks.
Number 2, Capuchin Crypt. Hey, I get it. In the past, there were no home renovators. You couldn't walk into your favorite big box home renovation store and pick out some great additions for interior design. Well, some guys in Rome thought their church was a little underwhelming. They wanted something that made a statement, something bold, something macabre. The Church of Santa Maria in Rome, and it has a longer name, but it's not dyslexia friendly, so I'm not going to pronounce it, is a church that's decorated with skulls. And bones, arranged in tasteful art pieces, lining the walls and archways with bones look like designs. And one room having some mummified monks and a wall full of skulls to comfort churchgoers. Oh god. I can just imagine what a room full of old bones smells like. Oh, no thank you. Oh, I'm gonna be sick. Oh.
And number 1, the Great Bed of Ware. Yeah, let's get nice and cozy for this last one. When putting this list together, Big Ched and I both agreed that haunted or not, this is a bed we would both have, for sure. It's massive, it's cozy, it caught our eye. It looks like a bed a king would sleep in, and rightfully so. The Great Bed of Ware was built for the royal family back in 1463. It was 12 feet by 12 feet, plenty of space to cut your toenails, whatever you want to do. Yeah, just brush them off. You got like 11 more feet to work with. You're good. It's a big bed. What a time. Jonas Fosbrook, a carpenter from the time, impressed King Edward IV with his work. The king gave him a pension for life all because of this bed. That's how good it was. Over time, the bed became property of the Lord of Ware Manor, a man named Thomas Fanshawe. People would travel all across the land to see this beauty. That's a fun family vacation. Hey, let's go see this bed. I heard it's a neat bed. Pack your stuff. Shakespeare mentioned it in The Twelfth Night. It was a big deal, but all those who stayed in the bed did not have a good night's rest. Rather, they woke up to scratches and bruises. It was horrible. That is, if they got enough sleep to begin with. People would wake up on the floor. Somehow they would roll out of a 12-foot bed. That's crazy. Today it can be found in the Victoria and Albert Museum, so if you want to go cuddle up, there you go.
At number 10, spicy defense. Usually when you think about wars from ancient times, you think of swords, spears, bows, and arrows as being the primary weapons used to fight, but that wasn't entirely the case with the ancient Greeks. It turns out that their warfare was a lot more advanced than you'd think. The ancient Greeks were actually known to have used chemical warfare as part of their defense. They were known to use poison-tipped arrows and incendiary weapons. The earliest example of such a thing in ancient Greece comes from the siege of Plataea in 429 BC, when Spartan soldiers set fire to a wood pile with sulfur, releasing sulfur dioxide gas into the air and forcing the opposing force to flee their positions. According to other accounts, they may have also poisoned the water supply. The most famous case of chemical warfare from the Greeks, however, comes from the Byzantine Greeks when they invented a petroleum-based substance that couldn't be extinguished with water and would be fired from tubes that were attached to Greek ships. What's so cool about that is the fact that no one has ever been able to recreate it. At number 9, #roasted. I'm sure you've no doubt heard of the messed up punishment devices that have been used throughout history. I have to say that the people of the past were very creative when it came to coming up with ways to bring harm to others, and the ancient Greeks were no exception. I mean, they certainly weren't the worst when it came to their punishments, but they still were going a little overboard. One of their famously horrific torture devices was called the brazen bull. It was a large hollow casting of a bull made from bronze that had a door installed into the side of it. When someone was up for punishment via the brazen bull, they would be stuffed inside the statue, the door would be closed on them, and a fire would be lit under the bull, heating the metal statue. The person inside would then be sadly roasted alive. I would much rather be roasted on Twitter than inside this mighty metal bull, that's for sure. Before we carry on talking about the messed up things that went on in ancient Greece, why not take a moment to leave a like on this video if you're enjoying it so far, and while you're at it, consider subscribing to the channel to see more videos like this one. At number 8, questionable relationships. The ancient Greeks had some pretty questionable habits when it came to the coming of age of young Greeks. The idea of a relationship between an older person and one who has not yet come of age was not only normal, but was encouraged. As part of the coming of age of young Greek boys, they would be part of a ritualistic kidnapping. Now don't worry, they weren't actually being taken from their beds in the middle of the night. This was more so an agreement made by the boy's father ahead of time, but either way, they would still be taken by an older person from the community, where they would be taken out into the wilderness and taught how to hunt, they would feast, and they would learn how to be an adult. They would later return to the community, where they would be given a choice of either severing ties with their adult partner or continuing their relationship with them. It's certainly a little unsettling, the fact that this kind of thing was normal. At number 7, backwards logic. It was tough being a woman in ancient Greece. I mean, it's been tough being a woman at any time throughout history, and we're still fighting for our place in society on many fronts, but back in the times of ancient Greece, they had it really bad. Part of Greek society included the notion that women were objects, and as a result, the Greeks
Greeks saw adultery as a worse crime than non-consensual relations. Now you're probably scratching your head thinking, why? And my dear viewer, I will tell you why they had this sort of backwards logic. You see, since women were considered to be objects and property, any kind of misconduct or mistreatment to a woman, especially one's spouse, this was considered to be almost like theft of this object, and so if found guilty, the person responsible for this injustice would be tried for adultery, not the real crime at hand, being the mistreatment of a woman. The punishment for an adulterer was quite severe, as when caught, they could risk being killed on the spot, and in the event of whatever affair, that would be grounds for an immediate divorce. At number 6, deformed males. Further on the topic of the presence of women in ancient Greek society, let's talk about how women were seen in their communities. Now, even though Aristotle was considered to be one of the greatest philosophers in history, his ideas were also quite flawed. During his life, he believed that women were deformed males who were created when, quote, something went wrong in their mother's wombs. Unquote. They considered women to be so terrible that the philosopher Plato also warned men against being reincarnated as a woman in the next life, saying that this could be avoided if they had lots of success during their current lifetime. Because of this view on women, baby girls were often abandoned, girls' education focused primarily on how to have and raise a family, and when girls were married off, they were considered to be property, like I mentioned in the previous number.
At number 5, the land of Punt. One of the most mysterious ancient tribes that you might not have known about are the people of the land of Punt. Many of the ancient cultures that we know about today we've learned through ancient texts, and this is basically the case with the land of Punt. We only know about them through Egyptian records. What we do know about the ancient land of Punt is that it was a kingdom somewhere in Africa that regularly made trades with ancient Egyptians. The land of Punt and the ancient Egyptians were trading goods from at least the 26th century BCE during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu, who was also known as the builder of the Great Pyramids of Giza. Now, even though we know that the land of Punt traded with ancient Egyptians, we don't know exactly where these people were located. The Egyptians kept record of the goods that were being traded with the land of Punt, like gold, ebony, and myrrh, but they didn't exactly keep record of where these goods were being sent, which has researchers frustrated because they can only hypothesize where these goods may have been sent. Some researchers believe that perhaps the land of Punt was located somewhere in Arabia, or perhaps on the Horn of Africa, or maybe somewhere down the Nile River that is now southern Sudan and Ethiopia. I honestly hope that one day the location of the land of Punt is found, because there could be so many amazing finds waiting to be discovered. At number 4, the Bell Beakers. Here's yet another mysterious ancient tribe that you might not have known about. The Bell Beakers are such a mystery that researchers base their name on the only artifacts that have ever been found from these ancient people. The Bell Beakers are known for their pottery that looks like upside down bells, hence the name. These ancient people are believed to have lived across Europe between 2800 BCE and 1800 BCE. Other than their distinctive bell beakers, this ancient tribe also left behind copper artifacts as well as burial sites. An ancient bell beaker cemetery containing 154 graves was found in what is now modern-day Czech Republic. Some researchers believe that the bell beakers may have also been responsible for the construction of part of Stonehenge. There are still many unanswered questions about the bell beakers, but until scientists find more evidence, this is all the information that we have on them for now. At number 3, the Danubians. The Danubians were an ancient civilization who thrived near the Balkan foothills and the lower Danube Valley between 5500 BCE and 3500 BCE. Over the course of 1500 years, the Danubians became one of the most advanced societies at this time. They were best known for their work with terracotta, more specifically their creation of goddess figurines. Though they are impressive pieces, the purpose of these figurines remains unknown to researchers, but many speculate that they were used to celebrate the strength of women in their culture. The Danubians were also known to cast gold into graves, and they seem to have taken this very seriously, since one of the cemeteries they found had a collection of around 3,000 pieces of gold. Though they were very impressive for their time, they later just seem to have vanished or died off. But researchers have yet to piece together exactly what happened to these ancient people. At number 2, the Jiahu. Before the rise of China's great dynasties, smaller tribes covered the area, each with their own unique cultures. One of the oldest of these ancient tribes were the Jiahu, and they were located in what is now modern-day Hainan province in eastern China. The Jiahu were China's first identifiable civilizations, and they thrived between 7000 BCE and 5700 BCE. The artifacts that researchers were able to recover from this 9,000-year-old civilization contain things like the world's earliest wine, the oldest working musical instruments, such as flutes made from the bones of birds, some of the oldest preserved rice, as well as the earliest samples of Chinese writing. As for what happened to the Jiahu people, researchers believe that they migrated elsewhere due to flooding from the nearby rivers. And finally, at number 1, Ain Ghazal. Located in what is now modern-day Jordan, Ain Ghazal was a Neolithic society that boomed during the transition between hunter-gatherer tribes and established civilizations. This ancient society started off with roughly 3,000 people as they came together to create their unique culture, and they also began to develop impressive artwork that decorated their metropolis. Things like plaster figurines of pregnant women and other stylized human figures were found to have adorned their cities. Archaeologists found evidence of this society's transition to farming and agriculture, noting their heavy use of goat herds and vegetable storage. Though the Ain Ghazal society was booming and growing, researchers have noticed groups of people packed up in a hurry and deserted their settlement, with over 90% of the population migrating elsewhere. No one quite knows what prompted so many people to leave the area, but it's most likely that they migrated to other established societies, leaving behind their transitional city for something more modern for their time.
Number 10, mummies. This should come as no surprise to anyone, but yeah, mummies. While not the first and not the last civilization to mummify their friends and family, ceasing to exist, they are probably most known for it. Well, that and maybe the pyramids. The pyramids are pretty cool, I guess. The process of mummifying or preserving the body was thought to be important for the soul during the afterlife. If the vessel or your body was not intact, then your soul could get lost. Therefore, if you want the pharaoh to live forever in the afterlife, then you must pickle and preserve the mighty king. I don't want my soul getting lost. Number 9, 40-year-old's worst nightmare. Despite my best efforts and anti-aging cream, there will come a time when I will be old. Personally, I'm not worried about putting some mileage on. That's life. However, something I am concerned about is the effects of aging. Have you ever just noticed that you ain't as limber as you used to be? You get tired easily. And if you have more than 3 beers, you have to lay down for 3 days. However, something that happens to a lot of men reaching their 40s is a little trouble in the bedroom. This was an issue in ancient Egypt, except sadly, there wasn't a messed up process to fix impotence. I know, right? That's crazy. You thought I was gonna say something weird like wrap a snake around it or something. But no. When in modern times the cute waitress at the golf clubhouse just doesn't get your blood pumping anymore, you can reach for a small blue pill that everybody knows. Egyptians did not possess such luxuries and instead prayed for the Pishadil to work. Dear Desert Jeebus, please make my wiener work again. Thank you. Number 8. Ahead of their time. Ancient Egyptians just may have been ahead of their time and didn't know it. The Egyptians had tons of different herbs, plants, and methods for treating all kinds of ailments. Their alchemy skill was maxed out. I never did that. However, one method they came up with may have been helping more than they thought. A porridge mixture that was boiled down that contained tetracycline, which, just in case you didn't know, is known as an antibiotic. This would have been very helpful for the time, as a scrape on the knee could be the difference between living and, well, not living. While this was being used, it's unsure if the Egyptians really knew why this method worked. We doubt they understood the finite details of antibiotics, and I'm not going to stand here and pretend that I do either, because I don't. Number 7. Tales from the Crypt Keeper. You didn't think I was going to talk about mummies and not talk about how they make them, right? Hold on to your spittoons, this is going to be a rough one. Okay, so we all know that when we pass on, our bodies begin to decay and break down. The Egyptians knew this, so they would have to be one step ahead if they were to have the king pickled in time for the afterlife. Well, first things first, the brains? They gotta go. They would remove the brain with a large spike and sort of mash it up there and well, then they drain the contents from the nose, which that is just disgusting. Stomach, colon, and lungs, well, those won't be needed in the afterlife either, so they gotta go too. But the heart stays though. That's where the soul is. The king was then dried out with mounds of alkaline salt in the world's best beef jerky impression. Afterwards, oils were rubbed into the skin and eventually a resin was applied to aid in the linen wrap sticking to the body, making for that distinct Tupperware brand airtight seal. The pickled king was wrapped numerous more times just to be safe, and then, if he was OG enough, placed into a sarcophagus, and if you're really cool, you'll get your own room full of gold and treasures, and your pet Whiskers, which is a cat, and be mummified because, well, you need him in the afterlife too. That is one heck of an undertaking process. And to be fair, it kinda worked, because There have been a few mummies recovered from Egypt, and they're in amazing condition, considering the age of course. Number 6, a little off the top. Okay, without the comment section oversharing here, some people have had circumcisions and some haven't. It's a part of life, okay? That's how it goes. Debatable to some, but it happens. This was a common practice in ancient Egypt, claimed to be for hygiene reasons. However, there's something a little bit different about their process. See, today it happens when you're a baby. A strange man comes in the room, and he cuts what he has to cut. L'chaim, it's done. There it is. That's it. It's over. Egyptians waited a little longer, however, closer to the age of 12 or 13. Can you imagine just chilling in the field one day, and then some strange dude grabs you and slaps you down on the table and makes a withdrawal from you to meat and veg? I talked to the chief today, and he just said that's not it. Don't do that.
At number 5, mass extinction. This one might be a little sad because we're going to talk about how scientists determined just how much destructions humans caused in the early days of humanity. While humans were evolving in Africa, the rest of the world's creatures were thriving for the most part. In many parts of the world untouched by human influence, there were megafauna. These megafauna were able to live and thrive for thousands of years, at least until Homo sapiens came along and ruined everything. As we started to traverse the globe, creating settlements and beginning the story of humanity, we also, in the process, killed off most of this megafauna, causing a mass extinction of these creatures. This extinction event, which scientists have called the Holocene extinction, is still ongoing. Most of the largest animals to have ever roamed the earth were wiped out around 80,000 years ago and went completely extinct by 10,000 years ago. Some scientists want to blame this on climate change. However, in a lot of places, the timing of the first human settlements and the extinction of certain animals line up too precisely to completely excuse us from having caused damage to Earth's megafauna. At number 4, baby burial. Though it can be really sad, finding ancient burial sites can give researchers a lot of information about the culture of certain groups of ancient people. At a 34,000-year-old hunter-gatherer burial site near Moscow, archaeologists discovered the remains of 2 adolescent boys, and what they found alongside the remains was surprising. These 2 boys, who looked to have had some kind of disability, were buried like royalty. They were buried together along with 10,000 mammoth beads, more than 20 armbands, around 300 pierced fox teeth, 16 ivory mammoth spears, carvings, antlers, and human fibula laid across the chest of each child. Compared to the other adult burial sites, this one was quite lavish, but the reason as to why these 2 were buried with so much care is unknown. It is one of those mysteries from our history that remains unsolved, making it a bit of a bizarre find. At number 3, old settlement. In an area of Kenya called Panga ya Saidi, archaeologists discovered a network of caves that are believed to have housed hundreds of people. This cave area houses more than 1,000 square feet of space, and it is believed that an ancient tribe used to call this place home. Inside this cave, archaeologists also discovered a collection of various stone tools that date back around 67,000 years. This was the ideal living arrangement for the ancient people who used to live there because the tropical climate of the area would have been good for survival, whereas other areas of Africa would have experienced drought. This discovery just helped further our understanding of how the early humans lived. At number 2, Homo floresiensis. Here's a really interesting species of human that has recently been discovered. Homo floresiensis, nicknamed the Hobbit, were ancient hominids who lived in Indonesia around 100,000 to 50,000 years ago, and as you could probably guess by its nickname, these ancient humans were very small. It is estimated that they only stood about 3'6" on average and weighed just over 60 pounds. Homo floresiensis also had tiny brains, large teeth, shrugged forward shoulders, had no chins, and had receding foreheads. So they definitely did not look like the rest of us humans. So far, the remains of these humans have only been found on the island of Flores, Indonesia, and because of that, scientists believe that this species of human was subjected to island dwarfism, an evolutionary process that occurs from long-term isolation on an island with limited food. This island also has pygmy elephants, who are also extinct. What's pretty cool though is that scientists are currently exploring new evidence that might suggest that Homo floresiensis might have already been small before arriving to the island. And finally at number 1, ancient music. When you think about ancient humans, you might not associate them with art or music as they were quite primitive, but it turns out that some of our human ancestors were quite musically inclined. Years back, scientists discovered the first evidence of musical instruments in Germany and Slovakia. In 2008, archaeologists in Germany found flutes made from mammoth ivory that date back around 40,000 years ago, and just a few years before that, in 1995 in Slovakia, researchers found other flutes made from the thigh bones of cave bears, which dated back around 60,000 years. These Slovakian flutes were the oldest musical instruments ever found, and they were made by Neanderthals. This opened up a whole new world of discovery for scientists, as this find suggested that these ancient people were able to comprehend concepts like rhythm, tempo, and melody. This also suggested that Neanderthals were much more intelligent and sophisticated than we thought.
Number 10, the Anguished Man. I don't care who you are, but every family out there has one artifact or one heirloom in their house that just doesn't sit well with you. Please comment below and let us know. I'm actually very curious to see what it is. For me, it was a dancing Halloween skull with moss and black roses coming out of its eyes, playing the classic funeral song. I don't know what you call it, but you know what I'm talking about. Speaking of funerals, that's probably where the Anguished Man came from. I'm just taking a guess. The Anguished Man is a painting of a man in anguish, or some sort of distress, and I'm not just saying this to be funny, but the painting is 100% bona fide scary. What's more unusual than that is that no one is sure of its origin or creator. The current owner of the painting says he got it from his grandmother, and the knowledge train stops there. No one knows where it came from. And seriously, look at it, it's scary, it's terrifying, I don't like it. I'm gonna walk off now, scared.
Number 9, the Goddess of Death statue. Well, that's quite the name. Okay, let's talk about it, shall we? For starters, it doesn't look like anything menacing, which makes the tale that much more convincing, if anything. It looks like one of those Crazy Bones. Remember Crazy Bones from the late 90s? So good. I had all of them. Put them in my mouth all the time, weirdly. It's like the suck on some Crazy Bones. This cursed ancient statue from 3500 BC was unearthed at Lempa, Cyprus back in 1878. The limestone was dated quite a while back, and the statue, as far as origins go, is a complete mystery. But many historians believe that it was once a fertility statue, or it represented a goddess whose name has now been lost in time. The statue has gone through numerous families, with tragedy following closely behind. Hence the, curse aspect of this list. Lord Elephant had the statue for around 6 years, and during that time, all 7 of his family members bit the bullet. Second owner, Ivor Minucci, same thing, entire family just wiped out, this time only within 4 years. Lord Thompson Noel, entire family, also 4 years, and then finally the statue had belonged to the late Sir Alan Biverbrook and his family. And you can probably guess what happened within a few years.
Number 8, Cursed Amethyst. A beautiful purple amethyst stolen from India. Worth a fortune and would make an excellent addition to any jewelry collection. Trouble is, there may be something wrong with this gorgeous gem. Cursed, that is. The first gentleman to appropriate this gem quickly became ill afterwards and passed away. The gem was then given to his son, who also became ill and croaked. The gem kept passing hands as the story goes on, until it came to the possession of a man named Edward Heron Allen, who was so convinced of the gem's dark powers, he stored it in a bank vault and put it in 7 lockboxes, just to make sure. It's kind of like the babushka doll from hell. He also left strict instructions to take out the gem 33 years exactly to the day that he put it in, and a warning for anyone who dares possess such an item. It now sits in the Museum of Natural History. I'll keep my distance, thank you very much.
Number 7, the Baker's Wedding Dress. Why is it in so many horror films the ghost is always a lady floating around in a white wedding dress? Mix it up a little, I don't know. Maybe a bridesmaid's gown wouldn't hurt. Maybe something red, something a little pizzazz on it, I don't know. Been watching a lot of RuPaul's Drag Race. Throw some glitter on something, I don't know. They're always taken out before their wedding night, it seems. Or apparently they're taken out over a vase. Back in 1849 in the small town of Altoona, Pennsylvania, Elias Baker and his wife Hetty lived in the Baker mansion. They had 2 sons, 1 daughter, and a baker. Anna had fallen in love with one of her father's employees, another steel worker, but her father wouldn't allow the relationship to really, take off. Anna vowed to never marry again, and she locked herself in her room. When her father passed away in 1848, she went to go find her true love, but he had since settled down. So she spent the rest of her days behaving erratically, She was upset, rightfully so. Her father didn't let her have her true love. And now her soul still haunts that same wedding dress today. Not just the dress too, the mansion is haunted as well, and guests would report furniture and vases moving around all the time. That's not bad as far as hauntings go. If you ask me, moving couches? That'd be great. I have a bad back. I would love some help. Really, thank you. Anna, grab the side. Let's go. 1, 2, 3.
Number 6, The Crying Boy. Another painting, I know, but this one is extra creepy. So basically, there's this very popular print of a painting. It's a boy, he's crying. Oh, I know, who would want that though, seriously. There's different versions of it, but originally done by Bruno Armilio. Well, we don't talk about Bruno because his painting had some serious creep factor going on. Besides the fact that it's a crying young man who's peering into the very depths of your soul, firefighters began to notice a pattern when putting out house fires. There's a connection here, hold on, stay tuned. No smoke alarms, leaving the stove unattended, and this painting were common. I wonder why, except the painting was never damaged in any of these fires. And after putting out a few houses, and the same painting keeps showing up and keeps surviving the said fires, that's strange. That's weird. As it turns out, the print had flame retardant chemicals in its production, thus protecting it. Maybe just don't bring it inside though. Number 5. When in Rome. Having a large quantity of warships in your harbor with shiny new weapons and technology is bad for one's health. But worse than that, it puts you in a position to be colonized. And to be fair, there was a good chance of that happening. From multiple nations actually. So when given an ultimatum, it was time to make a decision. But perhaps this wasn't all bad. The Japanese actually came up with a rather good solution. What if we take all the new technology and run with it? Maybe it's time to colonize some places ourselves, thought a room full of people ready to overthrow the feudal government with modern technology. And that's exactly what they did. An event in Japanese history called the Meiji Restoration was just that. What's unholy about the whole thing is how fast they did it, restoring the imperial reign but at the same time making it a very modern one. Within a few years, it had become the most powerful superpower in Asia. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Number 4. The Last Samurai. Japan went from feudal kingdoms to an imperial powerhouse maybe too quickly. Samurai for the longest time were a part of Japanese nobility. Swords for hire that became so rich and powerful that they essentially became the government themselves. So when the Meiji Restoration came about, the use of knights for hire really wasn't necessary with an imperial army and government. Tensions rose as a samurai rebellion had broken out. The samurai of the old world with traditional weapons, some firearms, and the new and powerful imperial Japanese army with modern weapons and lots of soldiers. After imperial Japanese victory, Japan would shortly begin its expansion and colonization of Asia, taking the stage as a major world player. Number 3. Stomach pains. If you know anything about Japanese history, you knew this was coming. No, not the Logan Paul incident, but seppuku, the tradition of unaliving yourself with the most pain possible. Look, you gotta give samurai credit. They follow that Bushido code to the T. I mean, I can't even commit to a good book sometimes. But as crazy as the tradition sounds to us, to the samurai, honor means everything. Often done when defeated or disgraced, it's a ritual knife to the belly, and see you soon in the afterlife, oh mighty emperor. The most well-known case of this was the tale of the 47 Ronin, who after being disgraced and avenging their master, were granted seppuku by the shogun. The story has been told in many plays and even some films. Number 2. 'Tis but a scratch, sir. Katanas are beautiful pieces of art in warfare. Just ask anyone at an anime convention, they'll tell you. But in all seriousness, a lot of time and effort goes into constructing a samurai blade. One might even say the blacksmith's soul gets put into every strike of his hammer. So when the blade is completed, you gotta test drive it. Make sure it's sharp. To test the sharpness of a samurai edge, you would use bamboo, animals, and the occasional criminal. This practice was called tameshigiri. That's right. They would test it on people. But I mean, what better way to know what your sword is gonna do than by knowing what it's going to do? Katanas could easily remove limbs from torsos. Records of these events have provided some knowledge of the human body's resistance to edge weapons. Thanks, samurai. And number 1, artsy brothels. Geisha women wore beautiful kimono robes and were oftentimes mistaken for being courtesans. While in some cases that is true about geishas, they were more like me. Wait, what? All jokes aside, they were more humble hosts for these pleasure quarters, oftentimes entertaining men before the scandalous behavior occurred. This was a time of great cultural and artistic expansion in Japan. So these pleasure houses were legal. A lot of these women, while not having the same amount of freedom and choice as today, actually did have more than their European counterparts. Nice.
At number 10, dental modification. When thinking about types of body modification, you might not always think of dental work falling under that category, because really, who just thinks about teeth on a daily basis other than dentists, right? No one is really thinking too hard about those bones in our mouths, but dental modification is a thing and has been for many, many years. Though nowadays we see modifications with braces, tooth gems, and the occasional grill, back in ancient times people were also modifying and decorating their pearly whites. For example, in the 7th century BC, Etruscan women would wear flat gold bands around their teeth as a way to both decorate and keep them in place. In Mesoamerica, some people would file their teeth using stone tools to carve their teeth into different shapes. They would also drill holes into their teeth and insert small stones and minerals like jade and iron pyrite into them. Vikings were also known to modify their teeth by carving horizontal grooves into them and sometimes filling the grooves with red dye as a way to make them look more fearsome. As if they needed to, right? I mean, they were Vikings. They were fearsome enough as it is. Though many of these practices have since been discontinued, so to speak, there are still people out there who we know would definitely try some of these ancient practices out. At number 9, foot binding. Foot binding was a body modification practice in China that began in the 10th century AD. This whole trend started because a court dancer bound her feet and the emperor at the time, Emperor Li Yu, liked what he saw. Soon this practice of foot binding became a huge trend and it became associated with being able to find a husband. The practice of foot binding began when a girl was 5 or 6 years old. They would have her feet be in hot water, have her nails cut short, and have their skin rubbed with oil before having their 4 smallest toes broken, folded over, and tied down. Then their feet would be bent in the middle to break the arch, and the girl would have to walk around like that, over time crushing the heel and sole of the foot. After about 2 years, the foot would be considered ready, and depending on the size of the girl's foot by the end, this would judge how easily she would be able to be matched with a good husband. This practice continued all the way until the 20th century. Now before I carry on telling you guys about weird ways people modified their bodies, let me first ask you to leave a like on this video if you're liking what you see so far, and also maybe consider subscribing while you're at it, so come join the Bumblebee family. At number 8, scarification. Scarification is the practice of cutting, burning, or slicing the skin to create raised scars that are seen as decorations on the body. The practice of scarification dates back quite a while, with the earliest evidence of this body modification dating back to 8000 BCE, where figurines of fertility goddesses were found with the appearance of scars along their bodies. Scarification could date back even further than that, but since skin is very rarely preserved, we may never know. Evidence of scarification have been found in cultures in Africa as well as Australia, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, North, South, and Central America. Depending on the specific culture, there were a number of reasons behind the presence of scarification in their culture. Some people did it to show status or wealth, others did it for cosmetic purposes, others did it as a rite of passage, and some did it to show how well they could handle pain. In many cultures, scarification is still present, and honestly, I think it's pretty beautiful. At number 7, trepanation. Trepanation is the process of drilling or scraping a hole into the human skull. Yeah, I know, it doesn't sound fun in the slightest, but back in the olden days, people did it, and it was a relatively common body modification for some reason. This practice was done in all sorts of cultures throughout different periods of time. During the Renaissance, trepanation was used to treat epilepsy and mental disorders, and this practice also dates as far back as the Paleolithic period. In ancient Peru, trepanation was done by using a ceremonial knife called a tumi. In ancient Greece, it was done using a drill. Polynesians used sharpened seashells, and in Europe, the procedure was done by using sharp flint or obsidian. Though we know that in the Renaissance, trepanation was considered a medical practice, in ancient times, the reason for this practice is still uncertain. It could have been used to try and fix damage from head trauma, but it's also believed that this practice was done to heal mental problems, release toxic spirits, or even as some kind of ritual. At number 6, neck stretching. In many cultures around the world, having a long neck is considered beautiful, and so many women practice neck stretching in order to attain this level of beauty. The practice of neck stretching is most commonly done by wearing metal rings around the neck, adding more and more rings over time. This practice was first seen in the 11th century in Southeast Asia. The theory behind the rings is that they're so thick that they push the head up, therefore stretching the neck, but in actuality, the lengthening of the neck is caused by the rings pushing down on the collarbones. The origin of this practice is unknown, but it is theorized that it began as a way of making women look more attractive in order to prevent getting captured as slaves. But on the other hand, some believe that this was a way of protecting people from getting attacked by tigers. Though this practice began so long ago, it is still a traditional body modification in some parts of the world.
Number 5, ashes to ashes. Here's another fun punishment. Man, these guys are really creative. This one is mentioned in the Bible, so you know it's gonna be good. Basically, the Persians built a tower, and it was filled with ash. Drop criminals into the ash tower, or there were 2 large paddles connected to the turning wheels outside that would churn the ash and victim inside, suffocating on the hot ash, making for a hot and dusty storm of hell and unholy foulness I can't even begin to describe. Like most things in history from this time, it has to be taken with a grain of salt. It could be very true, or not so true, as the Persian Empire did not leave us with much, and most knowledge of them comes from Greeks and Greek historians. But like most stories, there's truth in everything, and if that's even close to the truth, Well, that's just not right, man. Number 4. This is Sparta! Despite what a 2006 movie with spray-on abs might mislead you, the Battle of Thermopylae was no laughing matter. It pitted the very brave Spartans against the Persian invaders. And there were a lot of them. Like, really a lot of them. Attack after attack after attack, the Persians were not getting anywhere. It wasn't until one of the Greeks betrayed the Spartans by leaving the Persians on a flank that would result in the destruction of the Spartans. Although the Persians were victorious, it was in a sense a Pyrrhic victory, as the loss of life on the Persian side far outnumbered the deaths of the Spartans. It's a battle that would be remembered for its bravery, and enough to have a movie made about it many, many years later. Number 3. Here comes the boy. So after a failed attack on Greece, Persia was kinda down about that. No money in the treasury meant that the once great Persian Empire was on the decline. So what better time to invade? And that's just what Alexander the Great did. Through a very lengthy campaign that lasted 10 years and a very formidable fighting force, most likely the strongest ever at the time, he shattered the declining Persian Empire. He even managed to capture the city of Babylon. Talk about kicking a guy while he's down. His rule of the Persian Empire unfortunately was short-lived, as he died not too long after that at the ripe old age of 32. Boy, I sure hope I lived to the ripe age of 32. Number 2. The protection of Meow. Before the Persian Empire was no more, they were actually a very powerful empire. So powerful that they wanted a piece of Egypt. This war may have also been started by an insult from the pharaoh, but expanding was probably more likely. What makes this war so notable is the absolute 5-head play by Persia. Persia knew of the Egyptian culture and knew about their idolization of cats. So, to aid them in the invasion, the king advised them to use kitty power. Soldiers were painting cats in the god Bastet in order for Egyptians to not dare destroy an image of their god. More ridiculous than that was the use of live cats. Stray cats were rounded up and kept during battle in order to prevent the very lethal arrow fire. Soldiers still died in battle, but it is said that the cats gave enough of an advantage for there to be a Persian victory. Decent. Number 1. Progressive for the time. Looking back in time, we can all acknowledge that maybe we weren't so nice, and as time has moved on, we've gotten more progressive. When you think of ancient empires, you don't really think of progressive, but surprisingly Persia was for the time. Specifically women's rights. Women were free to move about. They were allowed to work and be higher ups and manage. But probably the most important aspect was the right to own business and property, which their European counterparts simply could not do.
Kicking off the list at number 10, the Ring of Secinianus. One ring to rule them all. And by rule, I mean curse you and your entire family for ages to come. Yeah, this 12-gram gold ring, for starters, was massive. It was beautiful. Its diameter was 25 millimeters, so unless you were wearing some mighty gauntlet, she might slip off. Big ol' ring. It's like a big onion ring, but a little bit more haunting. The ring had first been found in 1785. A farmer was plowing a field in Silchester Village, which is a village west of London, known for its, grim history, as are most of these things on this list. In 45 AD, ancient Romans invaded that site, and come the 7th century, it was completely abandoned. No one was left there. The ring was mighty. It had an inscription on it as well, a Latin inscription. Of course, always Latin. It read, Senecio vivas in diem. When 1929 rolled around, new details surfaced, or resurfaced rather. The data from the ring matched an excavation that was done in the early 1900s, less than 100 miles away, a place called Lydney. That's where this ring is from. That's the OG site. At the same site, however, a tablet was found recalling the Celtic god of healing and hunting and how his favorite gold ring was stolen. In case you're wondering why this rings a bell, Lord of the Rings was inspired by this legend. The tablet also says, may he who bears the name of Senecianus not have health until he brings the ring back to the temple of Nodens. So, if you've got it, let's go.
Number 9, the Crystal Skull. Honestly, I'm surprised we haven't talked about this more. A lot of Mesoamerican stuff today, but damn, they got a lot of curses and jinxes on all their stuff. And in reality, that's not fair. All a guy wants to do is loot and pillage other civilizations' treasures, just like my ancestors before me. Nice. Maybe. Well, besides being the second worst Indiana Jones movie, yeah, I said it, I like that one better than the Temple of Doom. Now, if you didn't sit through an hour of Shia LaBeouf, and honestly I don't blame you, basically the skulls are like a Pokemon or Dragon Balls. You gotta catch them all. Only then, you will receive a wish where a ghostly outworldish creature will grant you said Wish. In other words, this is what a weekend at Vanessa Hudgens' house looks like. I don't know, she said she can talk to ghosts, so. The only ghouls that she's talking to are the people who think High School Musical holds up as a theatrical release. Seriously, try watching that movie now without cringing yourself into the bottom of a liquor bottle. Speaking of ghosts and liquor, you can buy alcohol in the shape of a crystal skull, because we are modern humans and we don't take ancient warnings very seriously. We will probably feel the wrath of the crystal skull, all thanks to a Canadian Ghostbuster.
Number 8. Pompeii artifacts. Once a thriving, beautiful city in ancient Rome, Pompeii was sadly destroyed in 79 AD. This time, it wasn't humans responsible for the massive loss of life. What do you know? It was actually Mother Nature this time around. She got one. Nice. The eruption of Vesuvius buried the ancient city in volcanic ash. Thank you, it took 9 tries. Little do you know, viewer. Excavation didn't begin until much later, during the 18th century, and after a century of careful excavations, the city was finally reopened again to the public. Finally, yeah. Just the place you want to go. Hey, every year there's many reports of lootings, locals, tourists, you name it. Everyone wants to steal a little piece of Pompeii, literally a little just in their pocket. Yeah, as if raining volcanic ash wasn't bad enough, now there's thousands of people literally stealing your land. Piece by piece. Pompeii archaeological superintendents get over 100 packages a year of said stolen fragments. They return them. Yeah, thieves will send the artifact back with a little note explaining how sorry they are and how it's caused extreme bad luck in the household. Again, might have something to do with the fact that you're a thief, but hey, who knows? Maybe it's that one time. That's why your marriage failed.
Number 7. The Pharaohs of Egypt. It was said that any thieves who dare enter or disturb the slumber of the deceased kings shall be cursed and perish. Well, this applies to archaeologists too, unfortunately. Howard Carter, the famed archaeologist, and his team back in the 1920s had come across the discovery of a lifetime, finding the tomb of King Tutankhamun. You probably heard of him. And kickstarting the study of Egyptology. For anyone in the sciences out there, you know how exciting this is. Trouble is, some folks on Howard Carter's team started to feel a little under the weather. Maybe it was all the excitement from their discovery. Maybe it was the hot African sun and the dry desert, or maybe it was the curse of the Egyptian pharaohs, as some men on his team perished from blood diseases. That's just not okay. So what's the lesson here? Maybe leave these places alone before it starts raining frogs? Huh? Think about it. I don't want that.
Number 6. The Koh-i-Noor Diamond. Another list, another cursed diamond. Here we go, buckle up. The Koh-i-Noor diamond translates to Mountain of Light in Persian, which sounds beautiful, but all that glitters is not gold. A Hindu legend says those who wear the diamond will own the world, but will also know all its misfortunes. 186 carats, this thing was a pure beauty. Of course, it was passed ruler to ruler, century after century at that point. The earliest account actually is 1628. The diamond was first in the possession of Mughal ruler Shah Jahan, but once his own son had him imprisoned, the diamond later went to Iranian ruler come 1739. Nadir Shah invaded, taking countless lives, as well as the Koh-i-Noor diamond, all their jewels for that matter, not just the one. It was horrible, but later on he was taken out by 15 of his own officers while he was asleep. Come the 18th century, Queen Victoria had possession of the diamond after being used in the Treaty of Lahore, but Queen Victoria wasn't a fan of the shape. Yeah, she's like, it doesn't really fit with my gauntlet to snap people away. So she had it recut. So now it's only 105 carats, it's a little smaller, but it's still beautiful. Since then, the diamond has only been worn by British royal women, or else we'll explode. Number 5, wine time. When we think of ancient Greeks, we think of wine and parties and apparently naked exercise, right? But was it really a drunken festival of love all the time? I mean, hangovers are a thing, right? We need some recovery days. When did Gatorade get invented? I don't know, it's probably hard to keep up. Ancient Greeks actually rarely drank wine without diluting the hell out of it first. To water the wine, the ratio was 4-1 or 5-2. Either way, it's just water at that point. So you'll be hydrated, that's for sure, which is great, but you're not really getting drunk, so I don't know what the point was. Regular Joes would drink at taverns and the rich would throw house parties, so some things, of course, have stayed the same after all these years, but ancient Greeks believed that drinking undiluted wine could cause blindness or insanity. My friend, I think that's just called blacking out. I don't know. Who knows? If you did happen to drink too much wine, the 4th century poet Amphis, he's got your back. Best way to cure those ancient hangovers was to boil some cabbage. Nice, just what you want to smell after a night out. And in order to keep the party going without embarrassing yourself off some sparkling Shiraz, the best way to party and stay sober was to bake and eat a pig's lung. That's the trick to never getting drunk in ancient Greek times. Again though, I think that was just eating food. I think eating food helps before you drink. Either way, if you're gonna drink, do so responsibly. Eat some pig lung and then you'll be good. Number 4, bronze bull. On a list of unusual things ancient Greeks did, I think it's fair to throw in the bronze or the brazen bull. There is a bronze sculpture, often in the shape of a bull. Yeah, obviously. Usually it was large enough to fit a person inside. Yeah, I think I saw this in a Saw movie one time. That's how you know it's good. Once the person was locked inside, a fire would then be set underneath this bronze bull, and then you could probably figure out the rest of that situation and what happens to the victim inside. We'll say victim inside, not person. Victim. Horribly, painfully. It's all bad. They engineered the bull so that when somebody screamed inside, it sounded like a bull's roar. That's haunting. That's actually really horrible. Every time I talk about this, I'm like, this is real life. Real people did this. It was designed originally for Phalaris. He was a horrible ruler. He ruled around 560 BC, but the sculpture for Phalaris was built by Perillus, the guy who made the brazen bull. He was sadly the first victim. That's why you don't make torture devices. I don't know. Number 3, Greek statues. Okay, I'll lighten up the mood a little bit. The last one was a bit dark. We've all done this at one point. Maybe you're at a museum and you see a statue. It's right there in front of you. It's carved. It's pure beauty. It's massive. The warrior represented has like 15 abs. It's made of bronze, 8 feet tall. The amount of detail gone into their body is jaw-dropping. Truly, it's impressive. But did you know that ancient Greeks would make their bird small on purpose? On purpose. Yeah, men who were well endowed were more often than not fools. They were foolish. They only ruled for lust, right? They were just craved fools with big birds. If you had a big brain, however, you were the talk of the town. Ladies would whisper about you when you passed by in the street. Did you hear about Brian's big brain? Oh my God. He's got his dad's brain. Whenever an actor would play a fool on stage, they would be given a comedically large setup, you know? That's how you know he's the villain or the fool, the bad guy in the scenario. The way we see these statues today meant that they had self-control and intelligence. I always thought they were just in a cold room when they were getting their stuff carved, but that's what this channel's for. History, but make it a little silly. Number 2, the Battle of Marathon. Every New Year's, there's always that one guy on Facebook or Instagram who just becomes a runner just overnight. They have a little squirt water belt thing that they shoot it, the whole thing, the whole setup, and they train ideally for a marathon. That's the big thing that they talk about for an entire year, this marathon. What is a marathon? Was it a person, or is it just a name for 42 kilometers? Well, it was actually a battle back in 490 BC. That's how it kicked off. Between ancient Greeks and Persian invaders sent by King Darius, the Persians arrived to Marathon. There was about 20,000 of them, and they arrived to punish the Greeks for supporting the Ionians, who revolted against the Persians. Now, the Greeks were outnumbered here at this point, but they attacked hard and they attacked fast. They took out 6,000 Persians, and eventually they just fled the scene entirely. The number of Greek fighters lost was around 200, so far less casualties. The story of Philippides came to be at this time. He ran the first ever marathon. He ran all the way from Marathon to Athens to deliver messages, because BlackBerry wasn't a thing, obviously. So some guys had to be like, you bet. Imagine servers back then, they're like, would you want a large soda? You got. He was one of the Greek military men known as day-long runners. He did 6 marathons back to back. My knees hurt just saying that, you know what I mean? So next time you see somebody on Facebook become a marathon runner, just post a link to this video and be like, you got it. You're almost, just do 6 in a row and you're good. Also do 6 in a row naked in the heat and you're good. And finally, number 1, human sacrifice. Of course, we gotta end on something crazy like this. We found the remains of a 3,000-year-old skeleton in Greece. They found the skeleton on the side of Mount Lycaon, which historians know as the site of animal sacrifice for Zeus. I don't know why I pointed up, but probably not down, or yeah, Zeus, he's up there, yeah. Ancient writers mentioned this site and how human sacrifice was also at play here, and now, thanks to technology, we can confirm that this was for sure the case. We talked about zombies earlier and how bodies would be buried with like rocks in them and stuff. This is a bit different. This is actually much different. The upper part of the skull that was found was missing, first of all, and the body was laid on 2 lines of stones, with stone slabs just laid on their pelvis. Now, Greece, of course, is the birthplace of philosophy and democracy and all that good stuff, but they also did some sacrificial, shady stuff in their off time as well when they weren't slamming watered down Merlot. Science allowed us to look all over the world too, not just Greece. There's ancient Egyptians, Aztecs, sometimes after Mayan ball games, the losing team would be sacrificed. Yeah, that's pretty brutal. Everyone talks about how awful humans are now. Well, we've always been the worst. The Greeks just like to party while they were doing it. Kicking off the list at number 10, the Empress of Austria. The saying wrong place at the wrong time couldn't be used more in this case. Empress Elizabeth of Austria, she was sadly taken out by somebody who just wanted to attack a royal. He didn't have anything against Elizabeth per se, this man was an Italian anarchist named Luigi Lucchini, and that fateful day, September 10th, 1898, he took the Empress's life. In his own admission, Luigi stated that he had nothing against the Empress on a personal level at all. See, what had happened was he intended on taking the life of the Duke of Orleans, but when Luigi arrived a little too late in Geneva, the opportunity to do so had passed. He looked at a local newspaper, saw Elizabeth, and found out where she was staying, and he waited for her to leave that hotel. That's how easy it was. People are so creepy. Keep an eye open. If you're a queen, keep your eyes open. This is scary. Number 9. Royal curse. The remains of Polish queens and kings were discovered back in April 1931 in a crypt in Vilnius. Polish researchers didn't even know what they were in for. I mean, a storm had flooded a cathedral and they threw down sandbags to preserve the area, but on the night of April 25th, they had followed the water into this lost chamber that held the remains of Polish kings and queens. These remains, with the crowns still attached, might I add, were from the 15th century. What a find, right? Well, sadly the remains were all over this flooded tomb now. It wasn't really in one spot. It was horrible. And now after these discoveries, that's when things got really mysterious. Those involved in the findings began to die off in unusual circumstances, one after another. And it happened pretty quick too. One professor had died after falling down a shaft in his apartment. He had a heart attack. An engineer had died before him as well due to undisclosed medical issues. Another professor years later who worked in the crypt as well became paralyzed at age 62. A sculptor involved died when untying his shoelace. Just the weirdest way to go out. That's the only details that we know. Just, I don't know, use your imagination I guess. Maybe he fell and hit his head. That's sad, it's tragic. And another professor died in 1936 shortly after visiting the crypt as well. I sure hope this isn't an ancient curse because these guys were trying to preserve their history and avoid the crypt from flooding. Like, I don't know, we need a Ouija board to clear this whole thing up. We were trying to help you with the sandbags. Number 8, Queen Caroline. In a list of unusual ways that people have died, odds are it's going to get a little gruesome, a little messy. After all, that's why you clicked this video, right? Some ancient queens die natural causes and then history remembers them for their reign. In this case, history remembers Queen Caroline for the way that she died. It was written in an epigram from the 18th century from a poet named Alexander Pope. He wrote down, "Here lies wrapped up in 40,000 towels, the only proof that Caroline had bowels." It rhymes? Like, come on, man, you didn't have to do this. This is horrible. That's like a prank almost. I can't believe somebody was like, yeah, write that down. That's good. Did it rhyme? Yeah, she'd like that for sure. R.I.P. Number 7, Anne Boleyn. The second wife of King Henry VIII. Yes, we have a few on this list. She was found guilty of treason and she had been charged with having sexual relationships with 5 others, including Lord Rochford, aka her brother, George Boleyn. Yeah, the ancient days were a little bit odd. She had also apparently had relations with Sir Henry Norris, the king's close friend. And when I say close friend, I mean he was the groom of the stool, so they were tight. He literally would wipe his. So on top of this, Anne was also found guilty of conspiring to kill her husband. Now, it's since been proven that these crimes were a bunch of rubbish, basically. Anne wasn't even present when these events went down. She was still recovering from the birth of her daughter, future Elizabeth I, so there's no way in hell she was fooling around with the groom of the stool in October 1533. All 5 guys involved were executed on Tower Hill in May 1536, and then 2 days later, Anne joked about her little neck before being taken out with a sword as well. There wasn't even a coffin for her burial. Somebody had to go and get an old elm chest from the Tower Armory. They used a chest to bury her body near her brother, Lord Rochford. A chest. Horrible. That's so horrible. Number 6, Mary Queen of Scots. If you're a murderino, this one's pretty juicy. Listen up. Back in 1565, Mary was determined to take the throne for herself. When Mary was just 6 days old, her father, King James V, had passed away, so she ascended to the throne. She was about to marry the King of France in 1558, but he passed away, so she returned to Scotland as the country's monarch. Her next plan was to marry her cousin, Lord Darnley, so now if something were to happen to Elizabeth, Mary would be yet again lined up for the throne. That cousin ended up dying in a random explosion, and then years later, in 1568, Queen Elizabeth had welcomed Mary after she fled to England. So Mary was close, but now what? Well, Elizabeth had found out that Mary was involved in English Catholic and Spanish plots to overthrow her, so she was then placed on house arrest. Fair, more than fair. Cut to 19 years later, 1586, a letter had emerged revealing that Mary was involved in a plot to have her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I, killed. She was then sentenced to death and her head was taken off for treason. History is dark, my friends. Even if you're family, shit gets crazy. Number 5, loincloths. Going back to ancient Roman and Egyptian times, there we go, 2 for 1. The loincloth was of course used by all. Either that or you would just be naked. I found this neat step-by-step on how to make your own loincloth and I tried it and it's way more complicated than I could have ever imagined, okay? We don't have a lot of archaeological evidence because these linens barely made it through a decade, obviously. There's not a lot of bones in them that would hang out over these thousands of years. But ancient Romans would often use leather to make underwear. Can you imagine that? Hot goat skin wrapped around your waist in the sun? Oh, I need baby powder just thinking about it right now. We still use leather today when it comes to undergarments and, you know, zippers and stuff, but that's for another video. We'll get to that another time. Number 4, cesspools. Hey, here's a note. If you're gonna make a massive castle, you need to know where not to build certain rooms. In case you're building a castle, anyone watching? Like say over a cesspool, as an example. Yeah, don't build anything heavy over here, or else let's talk about it. Cesspools were often placed under floors, which makes sense because, you know, gravity and life and stuff. But you need to make sure those floors are supportive enough, period. That's it. Or else, this will happen. Back in 1183, the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire had a dinner in the Palace of Erfurt. But in the main floor of the main hall broke open, resulting in a bunch of dinner guests falling through said floor, with even a few drowning again in said cesspool. Yeah, it's a horrible way to go. And then again in 1326 in England, Richard the Raker had just sat down. The guy hasn't even started his meal yet, and then again the floor beneath him broke and he fell through and drowned in a cesspool. That's like the worst way to drown too. I'd say chamber pots were safer, but when it comes to waste, out of sight, out of mind. Sadly, just get that shit away from me. Just downhill, get it out, or else we'll drown in it, probably. Number 3, Roman shampoo. Okay, when my hair grew out over the pandemic, I had a panic attack. I don't know what the f to do. I had a huge wake-up call. I've never had long hair before. I didn't know what to use in this mop. I still don't. Clearly, evidently, all I had growing up was the classic 4-in-1 shampoo for guys. That wasn't working out at all. That sucked. I needed some curl cream, okay? Separate jars of items, not just a 5-in-1 with mouthwash on your head. Those aren't good. Those don't do anyone any good. But the ancient Romans, they didn't have Head and Shoulders back then. What did they do? Well, sometimes nothing. They would dip their hair in cold water and at public bathhouses also, very public. Then they would rub and scrape away oils. Lime water was also used to wash your hair, but that was just as useful as lime wire. Sometimes Europeans wouldn't even use water at all to clean their head. They would rub their head with bran, like just a loose bran, before bed, and then they'd brush it out with a comb in the morning. Yeah, bran. I used dog shampoo once by accident. I thought that was bad. Bran? It'd be so itchy, I wouldn't sleep a wink. Number 2, ancient socks. Somebody got me socks over the holidays as a gift, and let me tell you, last year, I became a man. I was like, thank you, I actually love this. This is now the best gift of my life. Socks and lip balm, that's it. I don't want a PlayStation, get lost. Socks in ancient Greece, first of all, they weren't, you know, the ankle socks. There weren't Vans skateboarding socks. There weren't the weird grippy ones that kids have. Where were those growing up, first of all? Not even close. Socks came around in the 8th century BC and it was made fresh from animal hairs. This led to Romans tying animal skins around their feet and then, you know, tying it more and more and more and higher. Anything to keep it there. Now cut to the 2nd century AD in ancient Rome, the sock game finally got real. Romans began using fabrics instead of animal skins. It was now softer, it was lighter, and then later in the 5th century, socks were worn only by the most holy, which is kind of ironic because socks have holes in them. You get the joke, there it is. Socks were associated with the church. They were considered a symbol of purity. Socks would go all the way up your leg back then. Like I said, a little different than the New Balance ankle socks we got today. A little less holy. Finally, number 1, public bathhouse. This last one, okay, we haven't moved on from this at all. That's why I wanted to finish this list. Nice little fresh, fun reminder from Taylor McWaters. Here we go. We still bathe together, a lot. We go to water parks and we swim around in pools filled with pee. Ancient Roman bathhouses were the older, slightly yuckier versions of water parks. They would literally spread intestinal parasites. They were actually way worse. And these massive rooms with giant pools just lied disease, nude, there were and everyone was sweaty and it was all tight and there was no filtration system. It was like an indoor hot tub without the pumps or the salts. It was gross. The Romans were literally figuring out sewage systems at the same time, which I of course mentioned earlier, but they were also the first to create heated public baths. Yeah, my above ground pool wasn't heated, but the ancient Romans, they had heated pools. Great, I gotta send an email to my dad this afternoon, now I'm pissed. The Archaeology and Anthropology department at Cambridge discovered that Romans brought lots of parasites to Europe. Yeah, the fossilized feces showed that these heated, relaxing, rejuvenating bathhouses nearby were all but. Yeah, they were horrible. They were just spreading hot disease, coming in hot.
Number 10, the sins of our fathers. Law and Order is not just a hit drama from the 90s with a killer soundtrack, but something that started with the civilizations a very long time ago. King Hammurabi and his code of law comes to mind. But today, we're talking about ancient Persia. We're talking about a corrupt judge named Sisimons. After taking a bribe and delivering a not so unbiased verdict, the king found out and was most displeased. This is one of the worst things to do to another human being, but poor Sisimons was flayed. Or in simpler terms, they done skinned that feller alive. To make an unholy situation even more uncomfortable, they made a chair and used his hide as a material, and made his son sit in the flesh chair to make his own judgments. Can't help but think that you'd be sitting there all day thinking of dear old dad because you're sitting on top of a chair that's kind of fuzzy, because dad had a lot of back hair. Yikes. Number 9. The annual purge. I don't know about you folks at home, but I love the holiday season. For me specifically, Christmas. And to me, the meaning of Christmas is something less to do with religious background, but just good cheer. Spending time with loved ones and friends, and really enjoying a nice homemade meal. I mean, come on, turkey with the stuffing. Can't go wrong there. And honestly, you can't beat a good stuffing. I love it. But looking back at ancient Persia, there was a different kind of holiday. One that also has its roots in less about religion and more about cold-blooded killings. There were Zoroastrian priests called the Magi, and although they weren't Persian, they were somewhat respected in Persian culture. But when a plot to overthrow the king was enacted, the Persians were not too happy, and slaughtered the people responsible for the coup. But just for good measure, they also slaughtered all the other priests in the palace. Okay, but they might have missed some outside in the city and they had to get them too. You know what, how about every year on this day we go on a Magi hunt? So it became a holiday. Every year on the day of the coup, there was a grand feast and then a hunt for the remaining survivors. That's really comforting, that's nice. Number 8. Poaching. It's 2021. We all know it's super uncool to poach. Illegally hunting endangered species for fun, or just one sought after piece of the animal like elephant tusks for ivory. Our Persian friends from the past just might have been partaking in the poaching of rhinos. While in the ancient world the laws of today were not around to protect animals, the reason was still there, and people wanted horns. For some reason, however, people thought that rhino horn held the power to purify water. Thus, it was used to detect poisonous liquids. It's a superstitious belief that actually would be carried on for a very long time. Rhino horn did have other uses in civilizations, but I like to think it was a coolness factor. You can't tell me drinking wine out of a hollowed out horn isn't cool, come on. Number 7, Marvin's room. Hey man, it's okay. We've all been there. We all felt that kind of hurt before. You're drunk, it's 3 a.m. in a big city with lights. She hurt you bad, dude. But you should just call her. Just see if she picks up. Maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should get really drunk and then come up with a solution and then see if it still sounds like a solid plan in the morning when you're sober. Yeah, when ancient Persians had a big decision to make, they used dad wisdom. Get super drunk and then think about critical events in life that require tough decision making. And when you're sober in the morning, do it drunk, you thought. Being honest was a big part of Persian culture. And when are people at their most honest? So the theory kind of makes sense to me. I just know that when I wake up in the morning after nurturing a case of beer, that last night's thoughts don't always translate well in the morning. Number 6. The land of milk and honey. Another creative punishment for the people who want to lose sleep tonight. A punishment for crimes Persians had come up with was scapism. This is where the Persians would feed a convicted criminal milk and honey. Sounds awesome, right? Well, not exactly. See, they entrapped the person between two boats, and every day they would force feed someone milk and honey. Milk and honey. Milk and honey. Over and over and over again. Also, slathering the mixture of the two on the poor helpless criminal. As time went on, flies and bugs would find themselves interested in a sweet smelling crook. As one must also use the bathroom after all that beautiful rich consumption. A true horror to see, but after enough time, the person who was unlucky enough to be in such a position slowly and painfully died in a bog of their own filth and rodent infested area. Most likely dying of septic shock. I don't even have a joke for this one. This is something that should just be in the next Saw movie. Ugh.
At number 5, democracy? Though the Greeks are often credited with the creation of democracy, much like anything else in this world, it has a dark history. One of injustice and bloodshed. Back in the days of ancient Greece and in the relatively early days of democracy, this political practice could sometimes be used for nefarious purposes. One of the best examples of that comes from the Mytilean debate of 427 BC. Basically what happened here is that during the Peloponnesian War, the city-state of Mytilene tried to free itself from the influence of Athens Athens. Their revolt ultimately failed, and the citizens of the city-state were subjected to a severe punishment. They decided to not only execute the prisoners that they'd taken to Athens, but also the entire adult male population, and women and children were sold into slavery. The vote to put a stop to Mytilene weighed heavily on the minds of those who voted for this outcome, so they later staged another vote, ultimately choosing to only punish those who were directly involved in the city's revolt. At number 4, crime and punishment. Earlier I mentioned one of the gruesome ways that people were punished in ancient Greece, but let me tell you some more about their ways of crime and punishment. The standard form of executing prisoners was by performing what was called a bloodless crucifixion. Basically, the convicted individual would, quote, be fastened to a board by the wrists and ankles, and a collar around the neck would be tightened gradually to strangle them to death. End quote. If an execution had to take place on a battlefield, the accused would be beheaded, but if given the option, you could sometimes avoid a violent death by instead choosing to ingest poison on your own terms. If you committed a crime and were able to avoid execution, then you would be exiled. If your crime was bad enough to be banished from your community, then your name and crime would be inscribed somewhere so that no one forgot what you did, meaning that your crime would be known for the rest of time. At number 3, this is Sparta. As you could imagine, childhood during ancient times was certainly no easy cakewalk, but one of the worst upbringings in ancient Greece had to go to the young citizens of Sparta. Just to give you an idea of how life might have been as a Spartan, just think about the fact that it was literally written into law that Spartans had to be, quote, fearless, ruthless, and disciplined above all else. End quote. Back then, a young Spartan boy would only grow up with his parents until he was 7 years old, which at this point he would then be sent to a military camp run by the state, where he would stay until he turned 30. Young Spartans were taught mostly about fighting, perfecting the art of combat, and would spend very little time learning math and music. These kids were taught to be ruthless, stealing for their survival, and not showing any fear towards their enemies. At number 2, ostracism. In Athens, back during ancient Greece, ostracism was a common aspect of political life. Back then, the citizens would evaluate the performance of their politicians. They would then vote on who didn't serve them well or who they didn't like, and the citizens would write the name of said person on a piece of broken pottery. The person who gained the most votes from the public would then be exiled from Athens for 10 years. Unfortunately, this was kind of a flawed system, and any clever politician would then be able to use this ostracism vote in order to get rid of their rival. After Athenians figured out the flaw in their system, their ostracism votes were later ended. And finally, at number 1, sacrifice. At this point, after learning about so many ancient civilizations, I think it's safe to assume that basically every civilization had their sacrifices. Human sacrifices, I mean. It's been theorized that perhaps the ancient Greeks were participating in such practices because back in 2016, the remains of a teenager were found on Mount Lycaon, which appeared to have been, quote, a product of ritual sacrifice, end quote. It is thought that perhaps this person was meant to serve as a sacrifice to the god Zeus. On top of that, there has also been pieces of ancient literature that depicts the sacrificing individuals in the same area that those remains were found. We don't know for certain if this kind of ritual was part of everyday life or if it was just a one-off type deal.
Kicking off the list at number 10, the bird. The bird is not the word. It's actually pretty offensive. To flip somebody the bird or to flip somebody off, of course, means to give them the middle finger. What are these little troublesome guys right here, one of these blurry dudes right here? Do we even know why we do this? I mean, I don't recommend it because obviously you'll get in a heap of trouble from whoever's on the other end, the receiving end of said finger. But giving somebody the middle finger comes from the 4th century BC in Athens. The philosopher Diogenes expressed how he felt visitors about Demosthenes. He described him by making a, well, you guessed it, a middle finger. It's a phallic gesture. The middle finger is supposed to be your, your bird, for lack of a better term, and the surrounding curled fingers are meant to be the other things that are around said thing on the body. I'm trying not to say what I really want to say here, but the bird is meant to, it's supposed to be one of those. The more you know. Ancient Greek history. Who would have thunk? Number 9. Column Wars. While the Greeks were going head to head with the Turks, they were fighting over their independence, of course, and the Greeks had the upper hand at Acropolis one day. They were surrounding their enemy and they had this stronghold in their grasp, and the Turks at the same time were running out of ammo and options. They then began to break apart the marble columns around them, just smashing them to pieces, just breaking them as fast as they can to try and get lead from inside and use that as ammo. Now, as the Greeks witnessed the destruction of their Parthenon, they panicked, obviously. They said, here, just take ammo instead. Whatever you do, just don't break those columns. We can keep fighting. In fact, we'll supply you the ammunition, just don't break those columns. And they did. The 1821 Greek War of Independence. Here you go, Ottoman Empire, take this lead. Now we can fight, let's do it. It's like when you're at a house party, they're like, just fight each other, just don't put a hole in the wall. I'll be grounded. Seriously, I can't fix that. I don't know how to. Number 8, zombies. It doesn't matter what the context is, zombies are always scary. Whenever we talk about ancient Egyptians, we break down the process of mummification. And you know what? I'll be honest, I missed that part. Just keep everything in jars, keep everything separate in different rooms, keep everything safe, surrounded by treasure in the middle of a tomb. No zombie is coming back to life if that's the case. You know what I mean? Well, ancient Greeks actually believed in zombies as well. They had steps they would take to prevent the dead from ever walking again. Archaeologists found graves where bodies were weighed down with rocks, or they would be pinned to their tombs. One of the two. Both pretty horrible. They weren't called zombies, of course, but rather revenants. Reanimated corpses that return to terrorize the living, aka zombies. It's a zombie. Dr. Solowski Weaver explains that bodies found at a cemetery near the ancient town of Camarina in southeast Sicily were feared to come back to life at one point. The town was once a Greek colony, of course now modern day Italy, but it's home to a 3rd century cemetery with around 3,000 bodies in there. There's more than half of them that are buried with coins, the usual, but a few of them were found in specific ways, peculiar ways. One body, found in tomb 653, their body was covered in large fragments of amphora. So it's whatever was underneath there, they didn't want that to move. Which is weird, because you're like, okay, I know that they're dead. Why are we putting a rock on them? You know, that fear, we still have it today. Number 7, stone cold. When the pandemic first began, one of the hardest things to get a hold of, surprisingly, was toilet paper. Yeah, it's pretty important. It's more important than we realized, because that was the thing on the news that we saw, people just boxing each other at a Walmart for toilet paper. When you run out of toilet paper, you often remember that moment regardless of where you are forever. Leaves of 3, let them be. That's all I'm saying. But ancient Greeks used these small ceramic pieces to wipe. Yeah, ceramic pieces, like sharp. French anthropologist Philippe Charlier expands on this toilet hygiene history in the British Medical Journal. It was these flat terracotta discs found in these ancient sites, and they had residue on them, so the proof's in the pudding. They also discovered a Greek cup which said 3 stones are enough to wipe one's arse. 3 stones. See, even today, it's like 3 pieces, 3 slices, 3 stones. It's always 3. Yeah, Greeks would use pebbles to wipe their butts. Never take the go for granted, ever again. Number 6, naked exercise. Okay, this one, honestly, I'm just saying it's unusual, but I'm on board with it. You ever forget a towel when you're showering? You gotta do that weird, naked, silly run through the hallway. I'll be honest with you guys, that's my favorite run. I feel like one of those aliens from Signs, just walking around all light, naked, and lanky. Just meant for speed, meant for greatness. Just wet, just like a lizard just slipping around all over the kitchen. Ancient Greeks used to work out naked. The word gymnasium translates to the Greek term gymnasion, which meant school for naked exercise. Yeah, growing up, I always wanted to go to Xavier's school for gifted youngsters. Now, I just want to go to Ezekiel's school for naked exercise. Just don't set up shop behind the guy working on his squats. That's probably a bad idea. You know what? The more I think of this, the more I convince myself it's a pretty terrible idea. Hey man, do you mind spotting me? Sure.
Number 5, bloodletting. The practice of bloodletting was common all over the world, but it may have gotten its start in ancient Egypt. It's a quite simple procedure, really. Black bile out of whack? Lose some blood. Can't stop coughing and sneezing? Drain some blood. Been possessed by demons and now they curse and haunt you as they run up and down your bloodstream? Drain some blood. The question is, however, was this really helping? The short answer, no. No, it wasn't. Besides feeling lightheaded and going pale, this didn't really achieve much, since the days of old were filled with all kinds of other ailments that would easily end someone's life before the spooky demons running up and down someone's bloodstream ever would. I don't feel good. Oh, we better bleed Grandpa again. I don't know, like what? Number 4, plastic surgery. Hey, there's nothing wrong with a little cosmetic surgery. I for one feel that if it'll make you feel better, go for it. Feel better about yourself. Do it. I don't think there's any shame in that. It's been around for a long time, so long that ancient Egyptians might have come up with the first nose jobs. Obviously not like the ones today, but they were knowledgeable in surgeries. After all, you open the chest cavity of a dozen kings and you jot some stuff down on some papyrus, you learn a thing or two. More interesting than shaving down your own beak, however, was their implementation of the prosthesis limbs. Yes, all the way back then. One mummy was actually found with a fake toe. When tested in the modern day with period-accurate sandals, it proved to work quite well and moved more efficiently than first thought. Again, for the time, this was pretty advanced. Number 3. The Ode of the Nile. Imagine people working all day in the blistering sands of Egypt, where the sun beams down on you like, well, the sun in the desert, lifting massive rocks and carving them to shape. I don't know about you guys, but I would be sweating. And that also means I wouldn't be smelling too fresh, resembling that of a high school locker room. Yuck. Well, the Egyptians knew this was an issue, so they came up with what was probably the first underarm deodorant, using nice herbs and other items that had pleasant aromas, and stuck them where the odor was coming from. In your armpits. I just know that after a long day of hard labor in the sun, I would need more than cinnamon sticks and lavender to tame the odor of my sweaty lumberjack armpits. That's just how it goes. Number 2. The Egyptian Brazilian. The 70s have come and gone, and a popular trend today is to be hairless. Everywhere. Even in places where you didn't think it was possible to grow hair when you were younger. Egyptians took it upon themselves to remove all their hair. Well, at least most of it. Not because the Nile River had nice beaches, but because of lice. Oh, yuck. While not an exact cure for the itchy bugs that plague schools across America, it did seem to help. And if you've ever had lice before, you know how bad that sucks. I had them once. It was the worst. Cut my hair, shave my head. Lots of baths. It's no fun, man. I'm too cute for that. I don't want that. Number 1. Wario breath. Wow. Okay. It makes sense that Egyptians would come up with breath mints and mouthwash. They fed their laborers diets of foods that contained a lot of onions and garlic. Sure, I'm just like everyone else who cooks. And when the recipe asks for 1 onion, maybe I put in 2. When it asked for 2 cloves of garlic, maybe I put in 4. You gotta love that flavor. It was thought that they help fight off disease, and they were kinda right. However, after eating all that flavor, your breath would be something rancid. So herbs and mints were used to help quell the breath that could peel the paint off of walls. Thank God. Number 10. Cold as the wind blows. Japan. We love the people, the food, the culture, and the samurai, because let's be honest, armored gentlemen of high morals with really sharp swords is just cool. Kublai Khan, being not as cool as Japan, said to himself and his massive ever-growing army, "We should go get some cool from Japan." And go to get cool they did. While some initial boat crossings and evasions went okay, to very notable instances where it did not go very well for the Mongol invaders. The worst incident being on August 12, 1281, with a combined fleet of 4,400 ships, over 140,000 Mongol warriors were ready to invade, when seemingly a large typhoon came out of nowhere and devastated the Mongol forces, with at least half of the men drowning and only a few hundred ships remained. Casualties were very high. Those that made it ashore were hunted down by the 40,000 samurai awaiting battle. Shortly after, the typhoon was dubbed the Divine Wind and was thought to be a gift from the gods. Holy for Japan, unholy for the Khan. Number 9. Ninja vanish. Samurai are distinguished by their colorful leather armor, and katanas that are forged with great care, and a code of honor that was upheld at all costs. But they were not the only warriors of ye olde times in Japan. The ninja needs no introduction, but here it goes anyway. Stealthy warriors cloaked in black who were hired for tactical espionage, and a really weird movie with turtles eating pizza with a rat. They were mercenaries hired by daimyos, and even samurai to get the misdeeds of war done. Sabotage and assassination were necessary in the rebellious and political climate Japan found itself in. It would see many political shifts and leaders fighting for control of a unified and fractured Japan. Number 8. My eyes! As previously mentioned, the ninja were stealthy warriors who did the dirty jobs no one else could. Specifically samurai, as the Bushido Code literally forbade them from it. And honestly, they were kind of high sniffing their own farts, as they felt a lot of things were below them, including ninjas. I for one would not want to disrespect such a worthy foe. What the ninja lack in a full military force or simply being in a traditional battle, they make up for it with their tactics and weapons. Equipped with a variety of weapons with a variety of uses, the most unholiest weapon in the ninja's arsenal was the Mitsubishi egg, not to be confused with Mitsubishi. A small container of sorts that held dirt and dust that when used would blind and disorientate the enemy. The worst flavor of this egg being filled with crushed glass. Yeah, crushed glass in the eye. It caused excruciating pain and would be quite difficult to deal with medically at the time. Honestly, who throws glass in eyes? Number 7. You can't come in. Tokugawa Iemitsu was the big bad shogun in power. And when you're the big bad shogun in power, you get to make big bad decisions. He ushered in the beginning of the Edo period, one that would see Japan prosper for a while, but it did eventually decline. Perhaps the worst part of this time was Japan's isolation. Japan basically locked itself in its bedroom and with a roar of prepubescent rage told the world not to come into my room. Tokugawa forbade any Japanese ships from leaving and anyone from entering. The penalty for disobeying such rule was death. Japan was nervous at the time as many European nations were beginning to colonize, and if they could rip apart a dynasty like China, surely they would be next. This isolation period lasted over 200 years, and while the world moved on, Japan kinda stayed frozen in time. Of course, like most laws, they get broken, and on the southern tips of Japan's coast, there was some important trading with the Dutch, but we won't tell anybody. Number 6. Manifest Destiny. Looking back on history, the United States and Japan are probably most recognized together as being combatants of that one war with that weird mustache guy, whatever it was called. And that war ending in the worst party favor ever, honestly. But that wasn't the first time these two nations met. It was a beautiful summer day in 1853 when just off the shores of Tokyo Bay some strange ships came into view. They were American ships with cannons, and they came bearing gifts to the emperor. And a very real ultimatum that can be summed up as, "My friends, you have been closed for too long. Open for trade, or else be annihilated, then open for trade." After some time, the Japanese really didn't have a choice. They dissolved the 200-year order to be isolated. The Americans were looking for trade, but in truth, a large motivation for their forced opening of Japan was manifest destiny. God bless America. God bless them.
Number 5. Charlotte Augusta. Princess Charlotte Augusta of Wales lost her life in 1817, and when I say ancient, this is probably the most recent that I'll go, because I know ancient means way back. I gotcha. But I have to include this one because as far as royals go, she was loved at this time. She ended up falling in love with Britain's Prince Leopold, but a year and a half later, she died giving birth. She was healthy at the time. She was only 21 years old when this happened. Charlotte was lined up to be the queen one day, and historical accounts say that the doctors here were at fault. Charlotte's tragic passing had vendors running out of black fabric. That's how rocked the public was right after this. Just massive displays of grief. What do you guys think? Comment down below. Was this a doctor conspiracy or just classic medieval times? It's the olden days. We can't really do as much. Let us know. Number 4. Catherine Howard. Queen of England from 1540 to 1541. Such a short amount of time, but why? Being the 5th wife of King Henry VIII, cousin to Anne Boleyn, referred to by King Henry as his rose without a thorn, he just gave her all the gifts and she was just 19 years old. Sounds great so far, but you know, because of his list, things won't end up well. Their marriage didn't even last a year until rumors, not letters or eyewitnesses, rumors started spreading about infidelity. There was a small amount of evidence that suggested that she had been romantically involved with somebody beforehand, so a jealous mad king got jealous and mad again. Shocker. You had me at 5th wife, I don't know. She was executed for adultery and treason at the Tower Green on February 13th, 1542. Number 3. Catherine Parr. When Catherine Parr got a position in Princess Mary's house in 1542, she met King Henry VIII. She was smart, she was 30 years old, so it was a step in the right direction age-wise when it comes to these queens and King Henry. Not that there's anything wrong with marrying somebody younger, that's not what I'm saying, but it's just, well, look at this list. All of these people died, spoiler alert, so the older the better at least. I don't know. She was seen as somebody who could nurse the king in his dying age, so the public liked her. She was the first English queen also to write and publish her own books. Now, come 1543, Catherine gave up her man, Thomas Seymour, to marry the king. The two got married that July at Hampton Court Palace, and from that point on, her beliefs were deemed dangerous. Queen Catherine was a supporter of the English Reformation, and Catherine's religious opponents were plotting against her and they tried to convince the king that she was dangerous. Her arrest was even planned, everything was kind of going in a bad direction. And then Catherine went to King Henry right away and then asked for forgiveness herself. You know, for pushing her views too far many times before, and he forgave her. Meanwhile, others are losing heads for having relationships. Okay. Her and Henry were married for 5 years, and then after his death, she married Thomas Seymour just a few months later. And then come September 1548, she died after giving birth to her daughter. The account of her death comes from a lady-in-waiting and friend of Catherine Parr, comes from Elizabeth Tyrrett, only her account is fishy because she never liked Thomas Seymour to begin with. She made it seem like Catherine was speaking about her husband in a negative manner when she was dying, and this is the only time in history where that's ever been an idea. So what do you think? It's like broken telephone, but hundreds of years ago. I'm like, maybe she was friends? I don't know. Sounds like a conspiracy. Number 2, Anne of Cleves. Where to even begin here? Okay, this one is sad, man. Anne was right in the middle of Henry's wives. She was married to King Henry for 6 months, and it was seen as quite strategic in a way. Henry's chief minister convinced him to marry one of the sisters of Germany's Duke of Cleves, either Anne or Amelia. So in order to decide, Henry requested that Hans Holbein travel to Cleves to paint a portrait of each sister. This is like the birth of Tinder right now. I'm not joking, this actually happened. This man compared portraits and then chose Anne because every man praiseth her beauty. She was compared to the silver moon. Yeah, try that on a dating site. I praiseth thou beauty, madam. Super swipe. A treaty was signed, and a few weeks later Anne arrived to England. Henry was beyond upset because she looked nothing like she did in her portrait. Yep, real life, this is what really happened. He tried to stop the wedding because of this, but it was too late. They had to follow through, and they got married on January 6, 1540. Anne later accepted the divorce because obviously a divorce was in play after what you just heard, and then she lived as the king's sister peacefully until her death in 1557. Of all the ways to be remembered in history, King Henry made this horrible for Anne. And finally, number 1, Cleopatra. Last of the Egyptian pharaohs and last on our list. One of the biggest questions to this day is just how Cleopatra died. What happened? It's been rumored for a while that a snake bite was the culprit, but many believe that Cleopatra also allowed a poisonous snake to end her life. They think it was a bite from an asp. But there's also a large amount of historians that also believe that she poisoned herself using a hairpin. Her lover Antony fell on his own sword, but Cleopatra, she just poked herself. She barely lost blood. Now, as a youngin', we have to note that Cleopatra was brilliant. She was also interested in learning specifically about chemistry. So this theory about her poisoning herself doesn't sound very far-fetched. Until we find her body, we'll really never know. What do you guys think?